What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. It is Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. And we're excited to be back with you again today. No matter where you're listening or watching, we are happy that you are here. We want to remind you before we get into this today that the Culture Base is all about helping leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and build scalable teams to get them there. If you're listening to this on an audio podcast platform, we'd love for you to leave a 5-star rating review situation to help get this content out even further. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. We're so glad to see you. You'll notice that Blake's background is new. Hashtag new house alert.
Yeah.
Hashtag new office alert.
Yeah. This was all day yesterday, just spending as much time as I could getting this ready just for this podcast. What you see right now is the only thing complete in this house. Okay. The rest of it is boxes over to these sides, or what you see looks great.
Yeah. It's like, this is the best effort.
This is what you got in there pretty quick. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you did. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that. You can see his different walls and backgrounds and lots of wood paneling. It's very good. Wood doors, not really paneling. Anyway, so glad you're watching on YouTube.
Of wood.
It's a lot of rich mahogany. Probably some leather-bound books in there somewhere too. Go ahead and like, subscribe, ring the bell if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you're missing out on the tour of Blake's new crib.
All 30 square foot that you can see.
New mansion in the hills. Yep. Maybe on our socials this week, we'll drop a tour of all the rest of the room that you couldn't see in the thing, so we can see the mess. Speaking of socials, you can follow us on the socials: YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all those different types of things like that, at the Culture Base, BASE. Or you can find us on our website, theculturebase.com, in which you can click on our button there that we have to get a free 30-minute strategy session with us on anything that we're talking about in any of these episodes to help you build those scalable teams, to get the culture that you desire to have for those teams. We would love to come alongside you and help you do that. All right. I think that's all the business. Today, we're going to talk about pessimism. Pessimism. I don't know why, but the more I say that word, the weirder it sounds.
It's like when you say something, rock.
Yeah. There's a term for that, where if you say something so long, a word becomes a sound.
Oh, really?
There is a term for that. And there's probably smarter people listening and watching to this right now going, it's this word, you idiot.
Yeah.
Drop it in the comments so that we can learn. I'm not going to look it up right now because we have too much to cover today about being pessimists. So I'm super optimistic about today's episode, though.
Yes.
Listen, Blake, a buzzword in today's society, you know what the biggest buzzword is? It used to be mental health, and now it's a close second. But what do you think it is?
Synergy.
Yep. A new synergy. Does that sound like news energy to anybody else? Okay. Sorry, that's a quote from 30 Rock. No, buzzword today's society is mindset. Everybody's talking about mindset right now, and for good reason, I think so. We know more than ever now about the impact of our thinking to our current reality. The lens in which we can view things can change our approach, thus changing the results. So it should come no surprise that one of the deadliest culture killers is pessimism, but it can be hard to identify sometimes and become a slow growing internal problem. So I think it's important, Blake, before we get into this too deep, that we kind of distinguish pessimism. Again, this word is a sound now to me, that we distinguish pessimism from a couple other things that I think it can be commonly confused as well, which we'll get into here. So pessimism is a tendency to see the worst aspect of things, or even further, to believe, right? Like that's the reality for you, is that you full on believe that the worst will happen. It's a lack of hope or confidence in the future. And I think the two things that Blake and I see it getting confused with commonly is skepticism and criticism. I think oftentimes we kind of lump those in as just like, you're just a pessimistic person because you're also a skeptic and you're a critic. But let's just be clear here right up front that whereas pessimism is all about the worst and it's confirming kind of that belief of the worst. That skepticism is more of a doubting kind of, I don't know, phrase. What am I looking? Label. It's more of a doubting label.
Yeah.
Um, that it doubts the good in situation. It's not saying that there isn't any good in the situation like pessimists are doing. It's just saying I'm doubtful that this might be as good as we think it is,
Hmm.
right? Or I'm doubtful that this situation is going to play out the way that we may think. And they may have some educated reasons behind those. They may have some previous experience behind that skepticism.
Hmm.
Whereas pessimism is just because, right? It's just because that's my natural lean. It's my natural tendency, which we're going to see here in a second. And criticism, Blake, verbalizes the bad in the situation. It verbalizes the bad in the situation, outweighing the good, and goes on and on about the bad of a situation.
Yeah.
It's the person that you say they're the person that pokes holes in it, right? They're the person that's going to come up with all the list of reasons of why we can't do something, which again, they could be good to have. Skeptics and critics can be healthy to a certain degree to have on your team. And we're going to get into that next week when we talk about how skeptics and critics can be involved in an ideal culture.
Yeah.
But pessimists, like, are going to have a hard time getting on board because they usually will believe the worst. And I think believe is the portion that I really want to emphasize here today, because that's the difference for me. That's the biggest difference in a pessimist or a skeptic or a critic, is that the pessimist truly believes
Mm.
the worst.
Yeah.
They've convinced themselves of the worst. To use a Brene Brown term, the story that they are telling themselves is the worst,
Yeah.
and they've told themselves that story so many times that they've dug a to get nerdy here. They've dug a neural pathway in their brain, and now that's the truth to them,
Yeah.
right? So that's really, I want to differentiate what we're talking about here today. And Blake, before I toss it to you, I was reading earlier today on Psychology Today, because I think this pessimism thing is a mental approach,
Yeah.
right? It's not, it manifests itself in words, but it's a mindset approach, this pessimism thing, right? And Psychology Today says that pessimism usually isn't a conscious choice. I think that's super
Yeah.
important to remember, that some people are genetically predisposed to be more negative than others. I know I am 100%. I know that about myself. So I lean in further on that to counter it, right? It says, let's see, some people are genetically predisposed to be more negative than others. However, pessimism is more often develops as a result of external circumstances, such as a bad breakup, job loss, injury, illness, or other trauma. Again, some of that previous experience come into play, where again, the skeptics and critics also have previous experience
Yeah.
coming into play. The difference is what they believe and what they verbalize.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest difference here today, Blake.
Yeah, and what's crazy here is it tends to be environmental, like, and it could have been from such a young age that they started seeing this environmental aspects, like you were talking about, like, what'd you say, like job loss, injury, those types of
Mhm.
things, like all those things could add to it. Your parents, how they've seen the world gets passed down, right? Like it is almost this generational thing that gets passed down. And if you've had 10 generations before you that saw the world a certain way and felt like it was all against them, there is a heavy likeliness that you're going to have the same thing. And I don't, I like what it said in psychology, like isn't usually a conscious choice. I don't think pessimists most of the time know they're pessimist.
Yeah.
I think they're adding value to the
Mm.
situation because at one point in time, and
They
I
think they're
wonder,
critics.
huh?
They think they're critics and skeptics, which add
Exactly. I
value.
think that's where it starts. I think in good, healthy skepticism, because we'll get into this next week, but skepticism can be very good. I don't like overly optimistic electricians because if they're like, yeah, power's probably fine. We probably hooked that up, right? No, that's how houses burn down and people get hurt. I don't
Mm.
like that. I like when they go, let's double check. Skepticism can be very healthy. And I think it starts there. And as soon as someone goes, hey, hold on a sec, let's check this. And then they were right. they got a dopamine hit. And like Dustin said, it created a neural pathway that said, this is right. And so all of a sudden, everything was not about figuring out the right thing. It was about getting that dopamine. And so now I'm just going to question everything. I'm going to play devil's advocate on every situation. Well, it probably won't work because of this. And we make the minor a major. Well,
Mm,
that won't work because of what if someone comes back and says this is a response to that sales question? Yeah, but 99% of the time that won't be the case. Why are we making this, you know, a focus on that 1%? Doesn't make
right.
sense. So that's where pessimism comes. They feel like they're adding value to the situation. They're feeling their value from the situation. So it is a really fine line. They will look and sound the same, but like Dustin said, I think it's the mindset. The mindset is really what's going to show whether someone's pessimist or optimist. That good way to ask a question is, okay, then what's the right answer here? I love asking pessimists. So what's the solve? What's the right answer? Do nothing, because now you're not. If the answer is do nothing, and there isn't good background for why not to do something there in that situation, then you're just a pessimist. If you're not really about adding the solution, instead just highlighting the problems, that's the problem. Okay. You are the problem if all you can see are problems and never hunger for figuring out the right solutions. Okay. So I think that kind of takes me to one of my favorite movies of all time.
Mhm.
Okay. I think Tom Cruise is in it. No, he
I
might
think
not.
both of our we in our top 5, like, probably favorite movies, I think both of us have, animated Disney movies.
Yeah, it isn't Tom Cruise, by the way.
No,
It's Ratatouille.
there it
Okay.
is.
I love Pixar. Dustin and I both geek out on the book Creativity Inc. Love that book.
Mhm.
Creators of Pixar and so
Ed
this
Catmull.
movie, huh?
Ed
Ed Catmull.
Catmull.
Yep.
Mhm.
Um, but the movie is about a rat who, um,
Not like a mob rat, like an actual animal.
yeah, like an actual animal who falls in love with cooking and the whole process of creating and like getting in there and understanding this French restaurant that was like a 3-star restaurant at a certain point. And I'm not going to go much further, but in the movie, there's these like just in every restaurant there are critics, right? Critics come and they look at everything they can pick apart. They talk about the service, the food, the creation of it all, and then they offer their opinion, right? And I want to be really clear: they offer their opinion, their critical approach to what they experienced. And at the very end of this, uh, spoiler by the way, if you haven't watched this by now, you pause this, skip forward about 30 seconds or so. I'll pause. Okay, good. But if you haven't seen it by now, you're the one missing out. It's been out for a minute. I don't feel like I'm ruining anything here.
Nah.
But the most staunch critic comes in like a head off or head to head with this restaurant. And his response after he's had this and finds out that the rat is the cook, he comes back with this very humbled approach. And I love what he says. So I'm going to read it word for word because I don't want to mess up the animated movies monologue here. Anyway, he says, in many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and easy to read. But the bitter truth we critics must face is that in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. But there are times when a critic truly risks something, and that is in the discovery and the defense of the new. The world is often unkind to new talent, new creations, and new friends. That's the end of it, by the way. So it takes very little effort, very little to kill something like culture. That's why we see culture destroying happening all over the place. It is not hard to be like, hey, can you find a place that's really sucky to work? Everyone's like, hands up, I know a place, right? But when you say, where is someone somewhere wonderful to work. It takes real talent to grow something to a place of thriving and growth. But that's what we're here to do. That's why this podcast exists. If you want to kill things, turn the podcast off now. It's not important. Just ignore the rest of this. But if you want to thrive, keep listening because this is the heart of what we're about, and that's creating thriving cultures.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to note about pessimists, just again speaking, because that is my natural lean and I've had to learn to counter it for so many years, is a phrase that has become popular in the last 5 or 6 years amongst mindset issues and mental health issues and things like that. And I'm not saying pessimism is a mental health condition. I'm just saying it's important to it's a mindset issue, and it's something that you need to concentrate in on. I think more often than not, I think sometimes we just kind of negate ourselves of, oh, that's just who I am. I'm just a
Yeah.
naturally pessimistic person. And I think what we've learned in the last handful of years is this phrase of it's okay to not be okay, right? It's okay to be a pessimist, but it's not okay to stay that way. So if you find yourself in a to be predisposed to this negative way of thinking, of seeing the glass half empty all the time, it's important to know that it's okay that that's your natural predisposition,
Mm.
but it's not okay to to allow that to maintain its normalcy, a place of normalcy in your life. Um, so I think it's important that we get into kind of some practical steps here. We don't want to just kind of be like, "Hey, pessimists are bad. Don't be one."
Yeah,
But
the
we want
pessimist
to.
approach.
But yeah, that's a real pessimistic approach, isn't it? To just say pessimists are bad. End of podcast.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for us to get into what uh, how to spot pessimists,
Mm.
because again, it can be very confusing uh, to kind of intertwine skeptics and critics into this category as well. And we're going to address next week about why, like I said, about why skeptics and critics can be a part of an ideal culture.
Mm.
Um, but I think it's important for you to know kind of some tactics. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just like, here's some things that we've seen work when it comes to identifying pessimism in your team culture. And the first thing I would say is you have to have honest, direct reports that can quickly convey suspicions of pessimists.
Mhm.
And here's the thing: if you have a direct report and you are not comfortable with them calling out something in you as their leader, that's an entirely separate issue
Mm.
that you need to address, because the pessimism that they may be suspicious of may be coming from you.
Mm. Yeah.
It might be coming from you. So you need to have direct reports that are honest, and they can quickly and gracefully convey suspicions of any pessimism inside the culture. Honestly, here I'm going to say this, and we didn't talk about this beforehand. I think pessimism doesn't always, in a team culture, an organization culture, doesn't always have to stem from a singular person. I don't even think it has to stem from a person in general. I
Mm.
think a team culture, as we talk about it, Blake, can be an organism, a living organism in of itself.
Mm.
And you can start to kind of have this culture that together rises this noise of pessimism
Mm.
more than it does of optimism,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to understand that sometimes there may not be any one person that you can pin this on, or a couple people that you can pin this on. As we say often, culture is what you allow to happen.
Mhm.
So it may just be some things that you've allowed to slip and you've allowed to kind of come by the wayside within your team, and that has to be addressed. Pessimists or pessimist culture, right? As we said before, all complaints,
Yep.
no solution.
Mhm.
Again, all complaints, no solution. If you hear or feel that on your team, there is pessimism in your culture,
Mm.
100%. Last thing I'll say here on how to spot it, and then I'll toss it over to Blake for any additional tips that he would have, is always ask for the last 2%. We briefly mentioned in a previous episode about our culture values at the culture base, and one of them is the last 2%, which briefly, that's the concept of, hey, most people, when they're in a one-on-one situation with you, they will be, if they trust you, they will be about 98% honest with you. Probably a made-up statistic, but it makes for a good story, right? Anyway, the point is that they're not being 100% honest with you. And so if this made up statistic of, hey, they're only being 98% honest with you, then what's the last 2%?
Mm,
What's the last 2% that they're not wanting to convey to you?
yeah.
That is something that you need to ask for sometimes, and not just go, well, they didn't give me their last 2%.
Mm,
Sometimes you need to prompt them and say, give me your last 2% here of, are you seeing this? Is it me? Is it someone that's lateral to me? Is it someone that's above me as the leader? Let's be honest and open about this, because without it, you're just going to continue to get yourself deeper and deeper into a pessimistic culture.
yeah. I think this is really important for a leader to hear. Really important because I don't, and this is, they sound so similar, so it sounds like they're opposites, but optimism and pessimism sound like they're two sides of the same coin. I don't think so. I think optimism and skepticism are two sides of the same coin. I think pessimism and creativity are those opposites here, right? And so,
Mm,
if you, as the leader, kind of what Dustin was saying here, you as the leader are creating at times the need or the perceived need for pessimism by not allowing creativity and not allowing questions and not allowing these things to happen. If someone says, "Hey, I've got an idea," and you get defensive because it's not yours and it's not your thing, and you're like, "No, we can't do that. But we've tried that before. It won't work." And you have all this quick shutdown, people are going to believe this isn't a place to grow, which
mm,
means they're not going to engage, which means they're just going to be easily pessimistic because it's easier to do so. It takes less effort for me to just be pessimist about the situation, but I'm also not going to be engaged. And so
right.
we are losing out on amazing creativity from different perspectives. And if a way to see that's the case is to see if you hear the vernacular the way we've always done it. If you
Mm,
hear that as a prized possession in your team, it's not
sacred
good.
cow.
It's yeah, get rid of it. Cut it,
Mhm,
chop its head off, get that cow out of there because you are destroying your culture um, unintentionally. You're destroying it passively. And now is the time to say, you know what? I do get defensive. Be honest with yourself. We all get defensive, and just say, okay, I'm getting defensive right now. Let's allow this conversation to happen and see if we can get this going. Not going to be easy, leader. Okay, if you feel like you already have a pessimist culture, then you need to know that this is going to be a hard road ahead of you. Okay, so just like
mhm.
put the knee pads and shoulder pads on, get your helmet on because it's going to be rough for a while and you're going to go through some hard criticism and that's okay. But if you can get to a place where you say, you know what, I've owned it. We've all owned it. Let's move forward and be creative. You're going to see some great stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a couple of different approaches that we can take on correcting this culture. Again, we don't want to just tell you how to like define it, identify it, but we also want to help you how to correct this culture if this is where you find yourself. So three different approaches that I want to kind of break down with you today, and I would love for Blake to interject throughout these as well. Is there's a correction clarity approach, there's a disciplinary approach, and then there's a removal approach. And so in the correction and clarity approach, and I kind of put these in this order, Blake. You can correct me if you're wrong. I put these in this order for sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. No,
Yeah, I
you're
was
right.
like, that was a little
Yeah.
subconscious jab.
Correct. You know what? If you're wrong, you can go ahead and correct me on it. That's not what I meant to say.
Correct me, but you'd
Correct
be
me if
wrong.
I'm wrong. See, I'm willing to be wrong. That's part of a good culture. Uh, I put them in this order because I think this is the steps. This is the order in which you should kind of approach it. I think first thing, you shouldn't jump to a disciplinary, and you shouldn't jump to a removal.
Yeah.
I think the first identification of this problem, there needs to be a correction or clarity approach to it. Meaning, sometimes I'm even going to go as far as say a lot of times, or even most of the time,
Yeah.
any issues that we have, including the issue of a pessimistic culture, it's probably a communication issue. Probably a communication issue. So it requires clarity and correction to squash it
Mm.
early. If you and your leadership and your executive team or whatever level of leadership that you find yourself in is constantly playing the cards close to your chest, and you're not
Mm.
being clear about what's actually happening, and you're not communicating what's actually happening on the team or in the company, then you're easily and quickly going to nurture a culture of pessimism,
Yeah.
because people will fill in the gaps of what they don't know.
Mm.
And what we know about human nature is most of us are naturally prone to be more negative. And so
Yeah.
we don't freely give benefit of the doubt as we maybe should sometimes. Uh, Instead, we go, "Oh, I don't know what's going on. It must be bad."
Mm.
You know what I mean? So I think there's an opportunity here first out the gate when the problem is identified, or even before
Mhm.
the problem it becomes a problem. There's an approach of correction and clarity. Anything you would add to that, Blake?
Yeah, everyone always thinks they're great at communication, and I think they're only 10% as good as they think they are.
Ooh,
And
that's low.
I just see it over and over, and I mean it
Yeah,
towards myself too. I always can I'm always
you are bad at it. I'm
I'm
just kidding.
always looking at the picture in my mind, but using my mouth, thinking I'm
Right.
telling everything that's in my mind, and I'm not. I'm only giving a tenth of what I can see to their understanding. And this
Yeah.
is communication. It's one of the top three reasons people leave a organization. And if your team values, in air quotes here, the I'll let them know on a need to know basis. If you value that so much, like, oh, once you're up at this level, then you'll understand more and we'll give you more information. Man, there is nothing wrong with giving more information than you think you need to. Okay. They may not understand it. So you may need some education aspects, but we tend to not do that and come up with phrases like a need to know basis because we don't want to
Mm.
educate, and
Yep.
that's a cultural issue. So I do think that if your team is valuing that need to know basis, you might have a deeper problem in this whole skepticism world, like you're adding to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other two approaches I think are a little bit more drastic. I think I'm going to make up my own statistic. I'm going to say 80% of the time, this problem could be fixed with a correction or clarity approach. But there are certain times when you have corrected and clarified things, but the pessimist still prevails, or the pessimism still prevails in your team culture. And that's when you have to look at what discipline looks like for you in your organization when things become toxic. Because now we've gone from we've corrected it to now it's or we tried to correct it, but now it's spreading a little bit, and it's kind of spreading in a toxic nature. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to discipline your team. I think everybody has to kind of come up with that on their own, and determine what's the most healthy for them, what's the most honoring for their team and the person that they have to discipline. Those types of things. Obviously, there's like performance improvement plans and all these different things that we can kind of hold over people. At the end of the day, the step needs to not be ignored, but it doesn't you do need to come up with it on your own, I think. What would you say that?
Yeah, for sure. When you look at the, like, how do you, like, I think you got to be very clear on that first part, right? The clarity aspect, have standards, put things in line. This is what we stand for. These are the things that are important to us. And because otherwise you can't hold people accountable to anything. So I think there has to be a level of clarity, but show grace and
Yeah.
understand that not everything fits inside that box of here. It either works this way or it doesn't, because then you're getting into that same, like, overcompensating mentality.
Right. And then lastly, just like everything else in your organization, this one maybe being even a little bit more performant, I would say probably more important than performance issue, uh, is this issue of pessimism. Sometimes it's inevitable that you have to remove the pessimism or the pessimist. So maybe if we're going to go back to how this could be not how this could not necessarily be a person, maybe it's a new client that your company took on, and that client is breeding some strong pessimism into your company's culture and into your organization's culture. Maybe if you've provided clarity on it, you've kind of put some disciplinary, like, hey, this is not us, just want you to know, and it continues, then maybe you need to remove yourself from that other organization. Maybe it's a vendor you use, maybe it's a client that, man, the money's great though, but is it worth it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then sometimes, obviously, it could be a person on your team, and if you've gone through these clarity and communication points, and you've gone through the disciplinary action, and it still persists, sometimes the surgical removal is required to kind of remove the disease.
Yeah. And I know it's going to be like, gosh, I feel like they go to this every time. But going back to your hiring, this is huge,
Mm,
right? Like, and if you don't learn from these moments, you're missing out on really good education that you're going to keep paying for over and over if you don't learn from it and implement it into your hiring and the questions you ask. Like, everyone wants to have like that. And we gave that list of questions to ask, and you can still get that from us. But the reality is, you need to be coming up with your own questions because every culture that is an ideal culture is ideal within the environment that it's in, right? So, like, the environment that's ideal for the polar bear is not the ideal environment for me. And so, it's important that you're coming up with questions that you're like, okay, hold on. This is happening over and over, and we got to get these types of people off of our team before they get on our team. And so that's why you say, let's come up with a question that asks this. Don't be like, "Hey, are you a pessimist or optimist?" Not good enough. Ask them
yeah,
questions because they're going to be like, "Oh, optimist, totally." But ask them questions that really bring out behavior that they have to respond to in the
mm,
moment. And then ask follow-up questions. Usually it's the follow-up, "Hey, explain that more to me." Like, when you say those kind of things, you start to get closer to the heart. But if
yeah,
you're good enough with the first thing you hear, you're going to keep going through this over and over.
yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think that's a good place to end today too. Before next week we get into skeptics and critics and ideal culture. If anything we said today resonated with you and your team, and you want some help, or you want somebody to just bounce off of kind of what this might look like in your culture, how to spot it, how to deal with it, those types of things, we'd love to chat with you. You can go to theculturebase.com, click on the strategy button, and just hop on our calendar, and we'd love to hop on a call with you to help you determine how to scale your team the best. So it's a February now, right? February is a thing that happened very quickly. It's a leap year. You get a bonus day. Make it worth it.
Mm.
Get out there and make it worth it. And we can't wait to talk to y'all next time on the Culture Base podcast.